Welcome to the Retirement Game Plan Podcast with Greg Johnson.
Well, welcome back to the Retirement Game Plan. In our last episode, we answered the question, can I retire? Today, we take the next step, and that's answering the question, how do I retire, or how do I go about the process of retiring? And oftentimes, this is where many people feel unprepared, not because of the money, but because of the transition that's about to occur in their lives. So it's not just a financial decision. It is truly a life transition. And today's all about helping you move into that transition with as much clarity and confidence as we can provide for you. So if there's somebody out there that you know that's trying to answer all these questions or trying to figure out how they go about retiring, I'd ask that you share the show with them, forward it on, encourage a conversation, and hopefully this would add value to their experience. So let's dive in. First off, why does this transition matter? Most advice in our industry focuses solely on the financial side. Do you have enough? Where's your money going to come from? All those little things. But very little planning actually goes into the transition itself. That's kind of an overlooked item, if you will, but oftentimes it's where a lot of mistakes can happen. So you remember from our last show that you're now moving from a time of life where you're earning income to now relying on the assets that you have to generate an income. And I've heard lots and lots of stories over the years of, as long as I'm making money or as long as I'm earning money, I can work my way through about anything. And that's pretty true. But that changes when we transition into retirement because now we're relying on what we have to generate the income that we need. So what does all that shift entail, right? It is going to entail a change in our finances, right? It's going to entail a change in our routine. How are we spending our time? And then another big one is it's going to change our sense of purpose. So we have to address all those items. And that's our goal for today's show, is to walk through some of those deals. A key idea that I would leave you with before we move on is that a good retirement is not just about if you can retire, but it's about how you retire. And all that needs to be put into the plan. So let's talk about that timing of your retirement. One of the first decisions that you're going to have to make along this journey is, what is my retirement date? It's not a date on the calendar. It's not March 1st, but it might eventually become March 1st. But that when am I going to retire or when should I retire date is really based upon the planning and the coordination that you do prior to that event happening. Things that you need to consider there would be your income, your Social Security application, your securing of health care, the impact that a retirement may have on taxation for that calendar year. So there's just some questions that we really got to answer in this process. And again, all this kind of goes into the timing. But what's our day one income plan look like? A couple years ago, we had somebody that was retiring at 63 years old. They weren't going to turn their Social Security on until they had hit age 67 or their full retirement age. Well, if I retire at 63, Greg, and I don't turn on my Social Security, how am I going to make this work? Again, that's what I'm referring to in day one income, is we had to pull a little extra income from other sources to make up what they weren't going to get in their Social Security benefits for another 4 years. Quite frankly, that happens a lot with the planning that we do. What would happen if I waited a couple more years? Or how does that impact my plan? And I'll tell you a story. We had a client we just recently worked with, and they were about 6 to 10 months away from what they thought was their target retirement date. We did all our work. We assembled the financial game plan. We looked at all the different scenarios, right? We built them a model, went through cash flow, and what we found was that if they had retired on the date that they had targeted for their retirement, again in their own head, they would have had a less than 30% chance of successfully meeting all the goals that they had put down. What did we do? Of course, we went and played with the model and maneuvered some things around. We allocated some different changes in their budget or their spending habits. And then we had a hard discussion with them. And we came back and we said, if you just delayed your retirement date another couple of years, it would make a drastic difference on the outcomes that you're looking at. Was that conversation fun? Absolutely not. But the science and math told us that we could make a drastic improvement if we spent a little bit of time or a little more time working And after that discussion with the client, they were relieved that they knew they could successfully retire with only putting in a couple more years of work. They decided that they were going to do that, and now feels like an entire weight is lifted off their shoulders. Those are the decisions that we've got to dive into, the can I retire, and then how I go about it. Another thing that I think is pretty important here is it's not always about, are you ready to retire, but is it more, am I being pushed into retirement, right? So what do I mean by that? I feel like a lot of times people come to us with a mindset or a belief that they are supposed to retire, whether they put that on themselves or whether they had a family member or they were keeping up with the Joneses. But I feel like a lot of people, when they get to 65, they feel like I've got to retire, even if they may not want to. So I think you have to take into account, like, how much do you enjoy the work that you do? Do you like the people that you're spending your time with at work, right? Are you enjoying your time there? Or are you really ready to move on to something different in life, something where you have complete freedom and choice, if you will? But I've worked with a lot of clients over the years that retired before doing any of this type of planning. And honestly, it's a mess, right? They come in, they've made poor decisions. They've withdrawn money from accounts that they shouldn't have. They've paid more in taxes than they needed to. They missed deadlines. I think back to a client that didn't realize when they turned 65 and left their employer health insurance that they had to secure a prescription drug plan, even if they weren't on any prescription drugs. So 3 years later, when they came into our office and we started talking with them, we found out that he now had to pay a penalty for the remainder of his life because he didn't know or understand that role. So timing is very important, and then making sure all the levers that need to be pulled that go along with that process is also really vital. So let's talk a little bit about those decisions. What are some of the key decisions that will need to be made in this process of how I go about retiring? So one of the first ones that we see out there oftentimes is a pension. Not everybody has pension plans today, but what you do see is for those that have a pension plan available or that they've participated in, there's now lots of options to choose from. Do I take a lump sum payout? Do I take a lifetime of income just for me? Do I take a lifetime of income for me and my spouse? Again, how do we go about figuring out what the right answer there is? Well, there's math that goes into those calculations, but then there's also other factors. And I think back to a story of a gal had a pretty good sized pension, had some kids that she wanted to make sure some dollars were left for. And throughout our discussion, she said, well, Greg, what if my husband and I die too young? What happens to the money that's inside of that pension? And basically the answer is it goes away. And so for her, we made the choice to take a lump sum distribution out purely based on her desire to leave that money to her children. Again, key decision that we've got to be able to make. Another client presented the same scenario. She still loved her kids and wanted to leave something for those kids, but the math was so drastically different that it didn't make sense for her to take the lump sum. She would have been best served by taking a lifetime of income from the plan. So we chose that plan. So the key there is to not just consider the math, but consider some of those outside factors in making that pension election from your employer. The next big decision that comes into play is your 401k or your retirement account through your employer. I think the big thing here is that age matters. And what a lot of people overlook there is if they're prior to age or younger than 59 and a half, if I roll those dollars out into a traditional IRA, there are some ways I can access that money, but it's not just a free pull and take without having incurred some sort of tax or early withdrawal penalty. So age is really important in this decision. And we had a client, we would have helped her roll over her 401k in her late 40s. Plan had grown, circumstances have changed. She lost her job at age 56, and she was debating whether or not she could retire. Well, at 56, money's already in a traditional IRA. If she were to take money from traditional IRA she had with us, she's incurring a penalty. She knows she she has to pay the tax on it, but now she's facing a penalty. We found in the tax code, there's what they call a 72T option that would allow for her to take certain distributions over a set amount of time. And by doing so, we were able to allow her to move into retirement. We've had others that we chose to leave the plan in the 401k because the 401k has the ability to roll some dollars out at age 55. Again, lots of circumstances there, but those are decisions that we need to make. Next one's Medicare and healthcare. This is an oftentimes challenging situation, one that we want to make you aware of and one that you need to have a strategy on, right? And what I mean by this is that if I'm prior to 65, I've got to figure out a way to secure my healthcare until I reach age 65 and can jump on a Medicare plan. You might have a COBRA option through your employer. You might choose to play the subsidy game in the Affordable Care Act, but whatever pathway you choose, we've got to account for the premium dollars, and that's usually a pretty big change from people that have worked at an employer who provided health insurance for their entire career to now them seeing how much money it's actually going to take them to secure health insurance. And in regards to Medicare, if we're over 65, it becomes a process. And I say that simply because it's not an easy thing to just go secure your Medicare plans and the insurance programs that go with them. So let me tell you a story. Husband was turning 65, wife was retiring at the same time. Wife had had the employer group plan for her entire career. We went in to start that process 3 months prior to their retirement date. We went on to the Social Security website and we applied for Parts A and Part B for the husband. The wife was retiring but was a little younger than 65. We filled out that application on October 12th, and on December 31st, a day before that plan was supposed to be implemented, we had no Medicare cards. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, but that's an example of why you want to start well before your target dates for all these things to come to fruition. We got it done, but there was a lot of hoops and hurdles that we had to jump through and whatnot to get that piece done. So we always tell folks that it's at least 2 to 3 months prior to your target date to start Medicare that you would want to begin that process, because you have to secure Parts A and Part B first. Once you have your card in hand, you can go out and start looking at the supplement, the prescription drug plan, maybe explore an advantage plan of some sort, but all that needs to be coordinated. So timing is really important there. The next one's exit sequencing. And what do I mean by exit sequencing? That sounds like a pretty in-depth term and kind of a difficult thing to think about. But the best analogy that I've always used for clients is I imagine a factory, right? And at that factory, there's one guy in charge of pulling levers. And each one of these levers in that factory account for something. One might be income. One might be Social Security. One might be your health insurance. One might be your pension election. Whatever those levers are in your situation, the sequencing of those pulls becomes very important. And I say that really because I've seen so many people over the years that retired on, let's say, May 1st, right? But they didn't have the levers pulled properly. So by June 1st, they didn't have enough money in their account and they were scrambling. They were scared. They didn't quite understand why they had gone from a world where they had collected a paycheck every couple weeks and paid all their bills and had the cushion that they deserved to now they were in kind of chaos. That's what I mean by the exit sequencing, is that ability to pull all those levers at the right time becomes extremely vital. The pathway to retirement is we want to make sure all those levers are pulled at the exact right time so that nothing changes in your financial world, right? It's just literally you moving on with whatever's next in life. Everything else is kind of taken care of. So the key decision or the key takeaway here for all of you to remember is that these decisions are all connected. They should not be made in isolation. They all need to be part of a plan that allows us to create that smooth transition into retirement. Now let's talk about one of the most unique things in this process, and that's the first year of retirement. We spend all this time planning ahead of our retirement date, but oftentimes we forget about the changes or the adjustments that need to be made in the first year of actually being retired. Quite frankly, some of the areas we talked about in session 1 or episode 1 were all about creating income streams and knowing how much we need and where's that money going to come from. All those things are super relevant, right? But what's more than likely going to happen is that if every day's Saturday, now all those plans get thrown out the window because your needs are different, right? You're spending more money than you anticipated. You took one extra trip that you didn't necessarily see on your radar, but it was too good of a trip to pass up. So those are where those adjustments need to be made, and then some questions need to be asked. So things like, do I feel stable? Am I confident in my income plan? How about my spending habits? Am I comfortable knowing that I'm spending what I'm spending in my retirement? We had a client that we had built the plan for. We were dialed in. They were ready to retire. And in their first year of retirement, they spent over 2 times what they had projected that they were going to spend. Do you suppose that ran them into a problem? Of course it did, right? It created a huge problem in their long-term plan. So we have to be aware of that, and the importance of that first year helps you adjust and determine what changes need to be made and the confidence that you have with those changes occurring. Now for the biggest part of this entire deal, and it's emotional readiness. So when I think of emotional readiness, again, oftentimes overlooked in planning, everybody in the industry wants to focus on numbers and returns and products and all these types of things. But in this question of how do I retire, we have to address this emotional readiness, because retirement is way more than finances. Retirement is a complete change of your routine, your purpose, your expectations, the daily grind that you go through. It's all together different. So we have to prepare for those types of things. And I want you guys to understand this, like, this is not an easy process for a lot of people. Like, if you think about it, I mean, my dad was a perfect example of this. My dad was a worker, right? So the idea or the concept of retiring was very challenging for him because he just didn't know what he was going to do. He'd worked his whole life. In fact, most of his life, he worked multiple jobs. He always used to make the comment like, you can't watch Gunsmoke every day, all day. So you've got to start thinking about, where am I going to spend my time? Who am I going to spend that time with? And what purpose or passion am I going to take into that time? Like, I hear this often, that I want to pass down the values that were taught or instilled in me by my parents or by my grandparents. But in today's world, what happens? You go see your grandkids or even your own kids, and everybody's on their phone, right? Everybody's playing Xbox or playing PlayStation or whatever it may be. So how am I going to connect with that person? Well, you better have a plan. So I would encourage you, we challenge all of our retirees to truly sit down and develop a plan. We have a whole deal that we designed. It's called Retire on Purpose. It was a great tool to help people think about who they wanted to spend time with. What was the purpose of them spending that time with? Formulate that, because this goes well beyond the honey-do list. The honey-do list is super simple, and quite frankly, everybody gets it done within 6 months anyways. So it's after that we've got to prepare ourselves for. And at first, it's going to feel weird, right? It truly will. How am I going to instill values in my grandkids or my own kids, or help teach them the knowledge, wisdom that I've gathered over 40, 50 years of working? But if we don't have a plan at all in place to do that, I'm certain it won't happen. And probably the best story that I'll tell, I talked about dad, so I just as well talk about mom here. As mom walked into retirement, she found that purpose. And I think it's really cool to see her doing the things, whether it be at her church. She's gotten super involved in playing pickleball, a sport that I don't believe had ever played before the last couple of years. The people she plays with sometimes says she's a little too competitive, but she should be, because she's my mother and that's who we are as people. But she's gotten involved in her church, started playing pickleball, has got people that she goes and rides her horses with during the middle of the week, and then still has time to come to all of our kids' ball games and all that stuff. And it is a little tough for me to talk about some of this stuff, but I think that's not done by accident. It's done with intention. And so I would encourage all of you to take that same approach. Like, let's set intentions. Let's have a purpose. Let's have a passion in life that we want to dive into, or we want to live out to be fulfilled. And I think that's a big part of emotional readiness that we're talking about. So how does the plan bring all this together? First and foremost, in episode 1, we talked all about the can I. That's all I call it, the science and math of your plan. You've got to be able to know your numbers and know you've got enough and know where it's going to come from and all those things. But the second part of the plan needs to start addressing some of this timing, this sequencing, as I referred it to. Again, it's the guy at the factory pulling all the levers at the exact right time to create this smooth transition where you don't have to stop living your life. And a true plan is going to cover all those different moving parts. And a true advisor should be addressing those in your conversations. Again, I think it's overlooked often because most of the times when I bring it up to people, they look at me like I'm crazy. But I can tell you, those that have the plan, just like I shared about the story of my own mother, it makes a difference. So the plan needs to create or coordinate all those decisions. It needs to be timed properly, and it needs to be addressed throughout that process. So the further ahead we can be here, the better off you're going to be prepared. And like I said, several years prior to your retirement date is very ideal to start the planning. Again, it comes to, I got to be able to answer the question, can I retire? And then the second part is how I retire and all the different levers that need to be pulled. Let's face it, it's pretty stressful. It's not an easy situation or not an easy transition, but having a little bit of a structured process is going to make a world of difference in that respect. So in closing, stepping into retirement is not automatic, all right? I guarantee that. It needs to be intentional. And what it's really about is making thoughtful decisions, having a clear plan, and giving yourself time to adjust. It won't be perfect day one. Keep working, keep adjusting it as it goes. If you take one thing from today, it's that retirement isn't a date. It truly is a transition, and it's a transition that should be planned. So I hope some of this stuff resonates with you. And if you're, again, running into conversations, having these types of thoughts, highly encourage you to get a plan or share this show for people to be educated on the steps, some of the decisions, and some of that emotional readiness that they need to be prepared for as they go into that retirement journey. Thanks for taking some time today. Now go out there and be great.
This is Compliance Calling, securities and investment advisory services offered through Osaic Wealth, Inc., member FINRA, SIPC. Osaic Wealth is separately owned, and other entities and/or marketing names, products, or services referenced here are independent of Osaic Wealth. The material discussed is meant for general informational purposes only and is not to be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice. Although the information has been gathered from sources believed to be reliable, please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon only when coordinated with individual professional advice. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Diversification does not insure against loss. Any guarantee language used pertains to insurance products, which are backed solely by the claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company. The opinions and forecasts expressed are those of the host and may not actually come to pass. This information is subject to change at any time based on market and other conditions and should not be construed as a recommendation of any specific security or investment plan. And that concludes our compliance call.